Flowers and toys to remember children killed as they slept.
The fire started, police believe, when petrol was poured through the letterbox.
My fear was you throw one of these grenades into a public house, into a nightclub, into a police carrier, you have killed everybody.
No, I'm not interested.
We're not interested in helping families who might have missed ones that you might have information about.
How many kids are in the house, Mrs. Philpott? Where are they?
6 of them.
Sorry?
6 of them.
Have you ever seen a fire? Have you heard a fire speak to you? Huh. I have. And it wouldn't let me nowhere near it.
I've actually been down to our home, and what we saw, we just cannot believe it.
There were people in our newsroom who were saying, there's something not right about this.
But it wasn't until I stood back and realised that it was just one big fix. They both looked scared.
In a cemetery a few miles from the centre of Derby lies 6 graves. Each of the headstones marks the final resting place of a family of children.
Flowers and toys to remember children killed as they slept.
The fire started, police believe, when petrol was poured through the letterbox.
The police are saying this is a potential murder investigation, with the cause of the fire yet to be confirmed.
The events that led to the children's deaths began back in May 2003, when a 19-year-old single mother called Mairead Duffy married her fiancé.
I went myself to give her away and that there. Went to a wedding, and then there was a reception held in a club on Elton Road when we came back and that there. And there was quite a few people there and that. You know, they're kind of one crowd sitting here of a family and another family sitting somewhere else kind of thing.
Jimmy's daughter had just married Mick Philpott, a man with a sinister past.
Kim Hill was his partner when he was 21 and in the army in the late 70s. She was 17. She had the temerity to send him a Dear John letter ending their relationship.
He responded by stabbing her 15 times, and when her mother tried to intervene, attacked her, seriously injuring her as well. And he went to prison for that.
He received a prison sentence of 7 years for attempted murder.
Philpott's conviction did little to change his attitude to women.
He's so egocentric. Everything he does is important in the sense that it's got to relate to him and how he feels, and he has absolutely no compunction in doing anything to hurt somebody else. We know this because he's, you know, hurt multiple partners in the past, and he has absolutely no remorse. And because of this combination, this makes him dangerous, because he has no ability to really see somebody else's perspective. And because he has no ability to see somebody else's perspective and no remorse, this is not going to stop him when he starts hurting somebody else.
Whether his new bride was aware of Philpott's history is unknown. But even on their wedding day, Mairead's father was concerned.
He seemed to be mingling around everywhere and among the women, stuff like that there. And half the time she was sitting there on her own, and he was nowhere near her. I said to him, I said, you're supposed to be with your wife today. I said, you're going around all these women, and he did quite annoy me. But, you know, I was in two minds of saying I'm going to whack him one in a minute, but I decided not to ruin the day kind of thing, so I just kind of bit my tongue and left it at that.
Everything that Mick does really is centred on Mick. Once you understand that, you can see why he behaves the way that he does. So Bearing that in mind, then everything that he does, he has no understanding of how it impacts on other people. And even if he does understand it, then he wouldn't care.
Already a father of 5 by the time he was 40, Mick Philpott had become adept at choosing the type of women who he could manipulate.
He always seemed to go for young girls that was vulnerable. There was always 16, 17-year-olds, or like Mairead, she'd just come out of a relationship which was abusive, so he pretended to be there for her, and then he ended up abusing her in some way anyway. So he just went for the young guns, really, that he could control.
He'd flatter them, they would be attracted to him because he gave them the attention, maybe attention they didn't have before in their life. And very quickly, he would get them on side, he'd move them in, and very soon he would start to control them.
Mick Philpott's obsessive and abusive behaviour left a trail of broken relationships in his wake.
He's also a very, very controlling man, and he will control every aspect of a partner's life. Their finances, where they work, where they live, who they see, where they go, everything about them. And he's done this on multiple occasions with different partners.
He used to do all the shopping. He'd do the food shopping. He had control of all the money. The girls didn't get no money. If they wanted something, they'd have to ask, and it was up to him whether he said yes or no to whether they got it. He sat there, but he gave the orders out, you know, to whoever cooked the tea. You wash the pots, you do this and you do that, sort of thing.
I think his extreme narcissism is also coming from a potential position of fear. He doesn't ever want to be left. He can't tolerate any rejection, and he's got a very sensitive, potentially injured sense of self. And in the course of his life, unfortunately, multiple people get hurt in order for him to operate the way he does.
Philpott met Mairead Duffy in the year 2000, and she quickly fell under his spell. The pair moved into 18 Victory Road, and whilst at first glance the relationship was a happy one, behind closed doors, it was a different story.
To a certain extent, yes, I think she was scared. She was controlled by Mick, and she didn't have a life of her own.
They were all trying to get her out and out there. Even the woman across the road was trying to get her out. She said she could get her a safe house, that she could go there with the children and she'd be safe and out there, but she wouldn't budge. She said, no, I'm stopping where I am.
She had a job working as a cleaner at one of the local hospitals, which, by all accounts, she absolutely loved. She was a happy-go-lucky person when she was at work, and then her demeanour would completely change and she'd go quiet and silent when she used to have to finish work and go and get picked up by Mick.
I can remember going round once and Mairead, she had bruises all up her face, and made out she got attacked going to the garage one night. But she never did admit it was Mick, but, you know, I assumed, and so did my husband, we thought it was a bit strange going to a garage at 2:30 in the morning. So I think she was just covering up for Mick.
In 2002, the domestic arrangements at 18 Victory Road became even stranger when Mick moved his 16-year-old mistress, Lisa Willis, into the house. She would even act as a bridesmaid to Mick and Mairead when the couple married a year later.
Both of them started families with Mick, and it got to a stage where there were 11 children living in the house.
Everybody just kind of said, well, they all seem to be getting on very well together, you know, and we all took a back foot and said, you know, as long as we can see the kids are all right, then the two women are all right, you know, let them get on with it. But we were all, you know, weird, you know. I couldn't do anything like that, and the kids would say we couldn't, kind of thing, you know, but it was something we got used to over a period of time.
My understanding is it's quite a harmonious house, although congested, because you had 11 children in there at one stage, plus 3 adults, hence Mick having a caravan outside the front of the house that he would live in and sleep in, and in his own words, alternate nights he'd have a different woman in there, whether it was his mistress or whether it was Mairead.
These unusual living arrangements began to attract the attention of the local community, and the situation wasn't helped by Mick's seemingly insatiable appetite for publicity.
We ran a story in 2006 where Mick Philpott came to us to say that he wanted a bigger council house. At the time, he was living at 18 Victory Road, and he was living there with his wife, Mairead, their children that he had at the time, plus his mistress, and the children that he had with his mistress at the time. On the back of our story, the Nationals picked it up the following day and ran with it. One of the tabloids dubbed him Shameless Mick after the TV programme. And on the back of that, the media appearances for Mick and Mairead spiralled, really.
It was just all about Mick, wasn't it? You know, if he wasn't the centre of attention, it wasn't really worth entertaining in his eyes. But, you know, his kids was looked after in our eyes. He was doing the right thing by his children. Even though he was unemployed, you know, his kids didn't want for anything. So, you know, no one really seen, you know, anything wrong in what Mick was doing. But the real truth is most of the ladies thought he was a pervert. The lads knew what he was, because he never really confronted any male in any aggressive shape or form, because he was a coward. He could only do it with women.
Although the adults' relationship at 18 Victory Road was unusual, there appears to be no question that life for the children living in the house was anything other than happy.
Oh, those little angels, they're so well-behaved children. I'm saying there's so many in the house. They was just really, really well-behaved.
They was all well looked after, all fed. You could walk past and you'd see them all in the window, you know, bouncing around the settees, or they was on the street playing football, and, you know, there wasn't not looked after. You know, they was always happy. They never wanted for nothing.
But in the early hours of the 11th of May, the people who lived on Victory Road were woken by an awful sight. A sight that would change their lives forever.
I looked out the window, and then I seen about a foot-high flame coming from the front door, and I just knew whose house it was straight away.
In February 2012, Philpott's mistress, Lisa Willis, decided that enough was enough.
His mistress was always the strongest one out of the pair of them, and they always said one day she will up and leave. I think she just had enough. She got older, she got wiser, and just had enough of the controlling situation, and just chose to get out with the kids.
Willis left 18 Victory Road along with the 5 children she shared with Mick. Philpott was furious, and he wanted revenge. But he also wanted the benefits payments that he'd lost when Lisa took her children away.
He was constantly on and on about it, you know, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and we have to do this and that to get the children back. And I think maybe he was pointing some of the blame at Mairead. If you hadn't have been here, she might have stayed, kind of thing.
Mick and Mairead Philpott, along with their 6 children, stayed at the house on Victory Road. Furious that Willis had left, Mick began legal proceedings to gain custody of their 5 children. A court hearing was set, but it was a date that neither party would attend. In the early hours of the 11th of May, the very day of the hearing, neighbours woke to a horrifying sight.
I looked out the window, and then I seen about a foot-high flame coming from the front door, and I just knew whose house it was straight away.
My brother's waking up frantically, and to me it sounded like saying it was a fire. You know, because I was still off sleep, I've got up thinking the fire was actually in our house. But when I heard him say, no, Mick's house, look out the window.
And I just seen somebody stood on the front, female, dressed, and said, where's Mick, where's the kids? In the house, in the house.
When I first seen it out the window, you know, I was looking through sleepy eyes. I could see flames at the door. When I got over there, you know, and it was only a matter of minutes, we were speaking like the door was ablaze, you know, and there was smoke coming right out of the windows, you know. So within a matter of minutes, it had just gone up like that.
Neighbours rushed to 18 Victory Road, which was now consumed by fire. They desperately tried to get into the house to rescue the 6 children who were asleep upstairs.
With that, I ran next door because there was a caravan. His caravan was obviously there blocking access. I jumped upon the caravan, straight over, and I just seen him and Mairead in the back garden, like, and I didn't think at the time, I just thought, well, these kids in there. And then when I jumped over, he says, oh, they're all in the back bedroom. And I thought to myself, you know, what? No, he weren't helping in any way. Went into the conservatory, because it was like a maze. He had a pool table one side and conservatory another side. Dogs barking here, there, smoke, alarms going off, smoke coming out, parrots squawking. But at that time, you know, I was just thinking, get in and try and help the kids. And it just didn't work. You know, the more I was going in, the more I was coming back. Have you ever seen a fire? Yeah. Have you heard a fire speak to you? Huh. I have. And it wouldn't let me nowhere near it. Nowhere. Just a howling and come on closer and you're dead. You wouldn't know until you smell it. It's like putting your mouth over a car exhaust and... Bearing in mind, I never had no T-shirt or nothing to cover my mouth. I was going nowhere. And my heart was just beating faster and faster, thinking, come on, just push forward, push forward.
Despite the valiant attempts of neighbours, the raging inferno that engulfed 18 Victory Road would claim the lives of 6 children who'd been asleep upstairs. Jade Philpott, who was 10, John, 9, Jack, 8, Jessie, 6, and 5-year-old Jaden died at the scene. The eldest child, 13-year-old Dwayne, Mairead's son from a previous relationship, was critically injured.
2 on 1 trolley. 2 on 1 trolley. The last one, Dwayne, on the pavement for 10 minutes, and I was trying to pump life into him.
Despite the frantic activity outside the house, onlookers began to question the actions of Mick and Mairead.
I realised straight away the parents weren't doing nothing. Well, I thought to myself, why aren't you holding on to my side saying, please, my kids, my kids? I've got kids. But as sure as I am sat here now, if he would have touched me on my shoulder once, said, my kids, please help me, I wouldn't be sat here today, brother.
It wasn't until I got off the caravan that I came onto the side of the neighbour's garden that I actually seen Mick coming out the front as I was going in the front, you know, and it was then, straight away then, that I knew, like, you know, something's wrong there, like. The way he come out that garden when I came in, he didn't look like a guy that was coughing, like he was pretending to be. The way that I seen Mairead, it was just frozen, you know, and I asked her how many kids are in the house, she said 6. I said, where? She says, all in the back bedroom. You know, there was no reaction from her.
Within an hour after it happened, me and my brother looked at each other and said, did you see what I just seen? And we'd not spoke, and I said, yeah. Is it right what we were thinking? I apologised to that boy, you know, for not being able to touch his kids in any way. I held him, and it was like holding a brick wall. And that son of a bitch destroyed my life. Destroyed it. Because that little girl was right there, near that window, and I couldn't touch her. Couldn't lay my hands on her. I'm so glad they weren't screaming. That's all. So that would have done it then.
In the confusion outside 18 Victory Road, friends and neighbours who had tried so hard to save the children began to realise there was something dreadfully wrong. Whilst they had risked their lives trying to get into the house, the children's parents had stood by and watched.
But it wasn't until I stood back and realised that it was just one big fix. They both looked scared because they knew they'd made the ultimate fuck up. If you're going to do a move like that, whether it's to get back at your ex-partner that's left you, your girlfriend, so you've not got a girlfriend and a wife no more, you get the kids out of the house. Whether it's to get a bigger house, you get the kids out of the house. Make them stay at their aunties. You know, you don't set fire to the pissing house with the kids in it thinking you can stop it. You can't. You know, he looked shocked, mate, and that's what struck me. You know, and he knew, I've known him for years, and he looked in my eyes and I knew, you know, I've got your ticket here, mate.
With the inferno finally out, police officers began to search for clues that they hoped would reveal how the fire that had killed 5 children and critically injured 1 more had started. They quickly realized that the blaze was not an accident.
The fire had started at the front door. The police confirmed that quite early on as part of their investigation. It also became quite clear that the police confirmed quite early on that the fire had been started deliberately, or that was their belief. Of course, there was a joint police and fire investigation. Once it became apparent that it had been started deliberately, the investigation went on to who could have started this. Because there were 2 arrests very early on, there was an assumption that the mistress was behind it and that it was the mistress that had been arrested.
The 2 arrests came to nothing. Philpott's mistress, Lisa Willis, and the second person were released without charge, leaving police desperate to find who had started the fire. As the rumour mill round Victory Road went into overdrive, the actions of Mick and Mairead grew increasingly bizarre, despite the eldest child, Dwayne, fighting for his life in hospital.
Dwayne was transferred to Birmingham Hospital, and at the time, Mick didn't want to go because he had a court appearance in the morning. So he said to Mairead, you go. And then, obviously, they told him, you know, you must go.
And in near enough, literally had to be forced into the car to go to Birmingham. My youngest daughter said that her and her mammy went up at 2 o'clock, and Mairead and Mick were in with Dwayne, and she said, do you want us to take over for an hour or 2 so she can go and freshen up and get a cup of tea and that there? They never came back till 11 o'clock that night. And my youngest daughter said you could tell them right away what they'd been doing because Mairead had all on her neck.
Unfortunately, there's been a severe deterioration in the condition of Dwayne. He's been at hospital now, obviously, since the fire. And in essence now, he's only being kept alive by a life support machine, which is very, very sad.
Dwayne Philpott lost his fight for life on the 14th of May, 3 days after the fire. As the police investigation continued, his parents seemingly had no idea that the finger of suspicion was pointing directly at them.
There was a huge amount of outpouring of grief in the community and further beyond for Mick and Mairead. They'd lost their 6 children in a house fire who wouldn't have sympathy for them. But then during that time, they'd been put into a hotel room in the Derby Hospital where the children's bodies were taken after the fire. There were rumours starting to circulate that Mick was going to different places and asking people for money. We know that he went to the travelling community and was given thousands of pounds by them, so they'd rallied round to support him. We'd heard that he'd been to one of the local supermarkets asking for handouts, asking for clothes. There was also a rumour that he was offered some clothes by one of the local supermarkets, but then turned them down because the clothes weren't good enough for him.
You had the Sikh community, you had the Asian community, you had the Gypsy community that chucked thousands, a few £1,000s to him that night because he'd lost his family, his ass and everything.
They'd been out shopping, they'd been down the pubs singing karaoke, they'd been down to Victory Roads to barbecues and that there.
I was upstairs at my mum's house and there was a knock on the door. And my cousin answered it, actually, who was staying that night at my mum's house, saying, Mick and Mairead's here. Now, this is a week after the fire, after what's all going through my head. And they come around to thank me and my brother for making the effort. Now, when they come in my mum's kitchen, there was not one bit of emotion in Mairead or one single emotion in Mick. Now, if I'd have lost 6 kids, right, there's no way that I could be standing without puffy eyes a week after thanking someone, looking all pretty, smiling. I had to embrace Mairead. They didn't embrace me. Mick tried to fake a a cry. So, it was the same thing that I seen that night.
Detectives had initially arrested Lisa Willis, but with her alibi confirmed, suspicion began to fall onto Mick and Mairead, especially now that police had proved the fire had been started inside the house. They, along with another man, Paul Mosley, a family friend who had been at the house that night, were placed under covert surveillance, which included bugging a hotel where the Philpotts were staying.
During the time that they were in the hotel, the police made some undercover recordings of them, which were used as key evidence in the trial. They included Mairead having sex with Paul Mosley in the hotel room while Mick was there, and they also include a lot of whispered conversations, which were analysed by prosecution and defence experts.
What did you say? Tell me what you said to him then. What you said about how many times I went up ladders?
I almost can't how many times I went up the ladders.
What did you say about me trying to go in?
You tried everything you could to get in there. I said to him I wanted to run through the flames.
He was heard saying things like, "Are we sticking to the story? What did you tell the police? What did you tell? How badly did you cry? Did you really cry your eyes out?"
What did you cry when you were saying it? How bad?
Not really, really bad, but I did cry.
That's so cool.
If the Philpotts were in any way involved with the fire, they were doing little to hide their guilt.
You know, he was going around to people's houses bragging about having all this money. He was in town shopping, singing at my mate's. Oh, it's unreal. My mate's daughter got christened and he was singing karaoke, Suspicious Minds. You've got to be happy when you sing. How's he happy after 6 children dying? Going out shopping, bragging about money.
As if this wasn't bad enough, on the 16th of May, 5 days after the fire, the Philpotts themselves called a press conference at the Derby Conference Centre. For all that witnessed it, it would become a defining moment in the case.
We got there, we really didn't know what to expect, but the Philpotts were brought in, as I'm sure everyone's seen. There were the cameras flashing, dictaphones going, you could hear the journalists scribbling in their notebooks. He pretty much collapsed straight away when he started talking. He thanked people like the Butler brothers who helped him on the night to try and get the children out.
To see this community to come together like they have, it's just too overwhelming.
In hindsight, and one of the most telling things about the whole of the press conference was how he never once paid any tribute to the children. He didn't name them, he didn't mention them. It was all over in 4 minutes and 55 seconds. Mick kept putting his hands over his face and leaning forward. Mairead had her head bowed. She'd occasionally look up at Mick. And I think it's after that press conference that a few people looked at each other, and I certainly, when I got back to the newsroom where they'd been watching it live on television, there were people in our newsroom who were saying, "There's something not right about this."
And of course, the poor firemen, the police, the ambulances, the doctors, the nurses, literally everybody who tried to help save our children, they couldn't.
To me, it was a show because I couldn't see a tear. I never heard a mention of the children or find out who done this to my children. And I thought to myself, what's wrong with the man? 6 children are dead. Somebody set the house on fire. No mention of the children, no sign of a tear. And I don't think there was a tear coming out Mairead's eye either. But she just sat there with her head down, clinging on to him.
Excuse me a minute.
The thing that I saw there was him being histrionic. This is a slightly separate thing to being narcissistic, and he has some traits of being histrionic as well. And what he was doing in that TV interview was he was really trying to show some emotion. And because he finds that hard, he gets it a little bit wrong. And so what he does is he overdoes it. So then he sort of comes out with all of the tears and all of the histrionic sort of element to him, because he thinks that's what people expect. But if you look very, very carefully at him when he's doing that, there are no tears at all. So he's wiping tears away, but he forgets that when you cry, your tears go down the inside of your nose and you have to wipe your nose as well. He's not quite worked that out, and so he wipes his eyes but forgets to wipe his nose.
What Philpott didn't realise was that as he revelled in the media spotlight, he was also being studied by the police. Because at the time of the press conference, he was their prime suspect.
It was a knock on the door at my mum's house, and it was just a routine, did you see it that night? And I said to that routine officer, look, me and my brother need to speak to someone, because what I seen that night was wrong. And before you know it, we had the murder squad come into interviews, the CID. And I'm glad it happened. Yeah.
On the 29th of May, 2 weeks after the fire, detectives felt they had enough evidence. Mick and Mairead Philpott were both arrested and charged with murdering their 6 children.
I recall sitting at my desk, an email pinging from the police press office, opening it up and seeing a 55-year-old man and a 31-year-old woman had been arrested on suspicion of murder, and just standing up and shouting over to them, literally standing up and going, the Philpotts have been arrested for murder.
It weren't a shock when they got arrested. We were supposed to meet him that morning, and I'd rang, the phones were switched off, and I said to my husband, "I've been arrested." You know, they've finally been arrested. Later on that day, we found out that he had been arrested and Mairead had too. And then I think it was 2 days later, we were sat watching 10 o'clock news, and then it said on there that they'd both been charged. And I was just glad that they finally caught up with them.
Only days later, a third man, Paul Mosley, a friend of the couple who was present at the house on the night of the fire, was also arrested on suspicion of murder. Their charges were later downgraded to manslaughter, meaning prosecutors didn't have to prove that the 3 accused actually intended to kill the 6 children, but only that they were responsible for their deaths.
The trial took place at Nottingham Crown Court. It started on February the 11th, 2013, which ironically was a year to the day that Mick's former mistress had walked out on him with the children. The courtroom that morning was just bristling, just the whole air of anticipation. You know, here is a man and his wife and his friend who were charged with the manslaughter of 6 of their children. The second that that dock opened and that the 3 of them walked in, so they're flanked by dock officers, everyone was craning their neck. Everyone wanted to see what they were wearing, what they looked like.
As the trial began, the whole sordid story of life at 18 Victory Road was laid bare.
A local radio reporter turned around to me and said, this whole story makes Shameless look like Downton Abbey. And I think it's a line that stuck with me throughout the whole of the trial. And that's very much how I view the relationship that Paul Mosley had with the Philpotts. It was seedy, there was dogging involved, there was 3-way sex, possibly more, who knows, but it was just a relationship that I couldn't possibly comprehend me having with anyone.
Their police interviews, recorded after the arrests, only served to strengthen the prosecution's case against the accused.
I think the police interviews were interesting. What the barrister for the prosecution did bring out in those interviews was the startling similarity in what Mick and Mairead said when they first observed the fire. They both said that they saw a bright orange light, and they both also said that they heard a pop. Now, what they were describing actually was the ignition of the fire. Well, they wouldn't have seen that from the other side of the room unless they set the fire. And they both described it in exactly the same terms. The barrister very rightly pointed that out and accused them of colluding with regard to their testimony. And that's absolutely right to do that. We saw some video evidence of him being interviewed. Well, they didn't quite pick up on this, but he gave a very revealing gesture, and he said, I saw the fire across the room, and he said, I saw the fire across the room. And he gestured the fire coming up towards his face. And of course, it couldn't possibly have done that from 20, 30 foot away. He was describing the fire igniting underneath him.
But one of the most damning pieces of evidence that was brought before the court was the 999 call made by Mick Philpott on the night of the fire.
What's your name, Mrs. Philpott. Mrs. Philpott. How many kids are in the house, Mrs. Philpott? Where are they? 6 of them. Sorry? 6 of them.
Mick was very, very calm in the first part of the call. That's the first thing I thought. The operator says, which service would you like? And Mick says, all 3, please. Later on, you see Mick says, I can't get out. I can't get out.
The fire service is away. I can't get out!
This is not a man who's desperate to get in to the house. This is a man having a panic attack who wants to get out of the situation.
I can't get out!
As the trial progressed, the true horror of what happened on the night of the fire was about to be revealed.
Someone, whether it was Mick or Paul or Mick, had been out and bought some petrol to deliberately start a fire to make it look as though someone had poured petrol through the letterbox and then lit it. Then someone, probably Mick, was going to grab a fire extinguisher and put it out, be the hero, go to court that morning on a custody battle with his children that he had with his mistress, use that as a, look at me, aren't I a hero? And it just went tragically wrong.
The fire got very quickly out of control. Mick had apparently done some DIY work inside the house. He had painted yacht varnish all the way up the woodwork up the stairs. This is highly flammable and should not be used on interiors. So the fire went straight up the stairs. Unfortunately, that wasn't the worst of it because there was far too much petrol used to ignite the fire. So using petrol to start a fire is one thing, but using the amount of petrol, which we know was used to start this particular fire, was really just asking for trouble.
One of the key pieces of evidence that the prosecution brought before the court was the petrol residue that was found on the clothes each of the 3 defendants were wearing on the night of the fire.
3 of them had petrol on their clothing. It was a very small amount. It wasn't a huge amount. They weren't sloshed all over their jeans or anything. But what the analysts had discovered was that the same type of petrol that was used to start the fire inside the house was also found in small quantities on all 3 of their clothing.
What was the chance that all 3 people who had been together that evening, we know they'd all been together that evening, what were the chances that they had all got total additive on them? Why would they have this additive, this petrol additive on them?
The petrol evidence, coupled with testimony from witnesses, was enough for the jury. All 3 defendants were found guilty of 6 counts of manslaughter.
When the first guilty verdict was read out, I was waiting with my mobile phone ready to send it back to our web editor to stick on the web straight away. I remember sending the message, looking over at Mick. Mick's got his arms forwarded, he's going like that. He isn't saying anything, and he's not showing any facial emotion. When Paul Mosley's guilty verdicts were read over, he was the only one who showed any emotion. He looked over and was shaking his head. He went pale. But as soon as they were taken from the dock and the courtroom was cleared, I think that's maybe more when the emotion came out. I know one of Mairead's sisters, as she was getting led away, said something along the lines of, I knew on that morning that you had done this. And she shouted that in the courtroom before she stormed out.
For his role as the driving force in the botched arson attempt, allegedly to frame his mistress, Mick Philpott received a life sentence, with the judge describing him as a disturbingly dangerous man with no moral compass. Mick Philpott and Paul Mosley were each sentenced to 17 years in prison. To friends and relatives, however, the sentences were unduly lenient.
Yeah, I burst out in tears. I did. There's no justification in that at all. Divide it into 6. You can't do it.
17 years after that, you know, it's only a couple of years a kid, that's not right, man. You know. But then she's got to get out living with this on her conscience. But has she got any conscience, you know? Who knows? But they've been sentenced, justice has been paid. But for me, it wasn't long enough, nowhere near long enough.
When they passed the sentence and that there, some of us were pleased inside, others weren't. Others thought they should have got more. Thought they should have been done for each child individually, instead of, you know, basically there were 6 child, they got 1 sentence for the whole 6 children. A lot of us thought they should have got a sentence for each child, kind of thing, you know. And there was people stood up in court and, you know, justice has been done. My daughter went and won and this, that and the other. And all he could do when he was laugh, and when he was turning to take him downstairs, putting his finger up to his family and that there, and tough lot.
I'll never get over it. I'll try and deal with it, but I'll never get over it. It's there every day in my head. Every day, 6 little babies dead on the tarmac. Nobody can help them. And their own parents did it. And I couldn't help them. Couldn't do nothing. Stand there and watch. So no, I'll never get over it. But I'll try and deal with it. That's all I can do.
Personally, I'd like to kill the man for what he's done to them children and what he's done to my daughter. Because at the end of the day, yeah, what she has done, I can't forgive her for. She's still my daughter, I still love her, but I blame him for the way she was and the way she is now and what she's done, all his doing. That's to me, I'd strangle the man tomorrow, I gave him half a chance. Well, I mean, some nights I sit back and think, what did I do wrong that she turned out the way she did? You know, I blame myself sometimes.
Starting a fire to frame someone that's got completely out of control, where 6 children aged 13 or under have died, I can't comprehend it. I really can't. Idiotic, stupid, naive, you can use whatever adjective you like, but I think you just have to remember that, you know, it's children, 6 children. They're no longer here. I really hope Derby gets over this, but I'm not sure it will. I think it will hang over the city for a long time to come. I think the outside world will look at Derby and I think it'll go, that's the city where the bloke killed his 6 kids.
Is there any way that you can assist us in finding this girl now?
As I say, I've never met her.
Personally, I believe Peter Tobin is one of the most dangerous men in the country.
His anger overflowed as he was led from court this evening.
We knew pretty much straight away when she hadn't come home that something serious had happened.
Another awful discovery at Irvine Drive.
Peter Tobin didn't just take my daughter away, he took my life away. He ruined my life, as far as I'm concerned. He ruined it completely.
No, I'm not interested.
You're not interested in helping families who might have missed ones that you might have information about?
It was very apparent that it had been a violent death and that she had been injured really badly.
Mr Tobin is considered a potential risk to members of the public. Any person who sees this man is advised not to approach him.
I was a police officer for 34 years, and in that long career, I never met anyone as evil and dangerous as Peter Tobin.
Glasgow, September 2006. 23-year-old Polish student Angelika Kluk is only days away from completing the summer. living and working in the city before returning to a language studies course at the University of Gdansk.
This was a young girl who was from Poland. She came to Glasgow to better herself, to improve her education. She spoke various languages. She was an intelligent young woman, a person that worked at the church as a cleaner to make extra money. She was given accommodation there. A trusting, lovely, intelligent young woman.
Angelika had been staying in the chapel house of St Patrick's, a busy Catholic church close to the centre of the city. Having already spent the previous summer in Glasgow, she had become a well-known member of the congregation. Parish priest Father Jerry Nugent operated an open-door policy at the church and gave work and accommodation to people in need of a safe place to stay. In August 2006, another person seeking refuge at the church was Patrick McLaughlin. After offering to paint part of the church, he began volunteering with homeless charity Loaves and Fishes. And within just a few weeks, he had won the trust of the priest and other parishioners.
Patrick McLaughlin was the handyman at the church. He was a person that worked for free. It was voluntary work. He was helping the homeless. He was a do-gooder in people's eyes, a person that was at the church. He was everyone's friend.
He painted a room, he put up a shed, he painted the garage door. He did do a good job of these things he was doing, you know, and he done other bits and bobs, whatever Father Jerry needed. Probably turn his hand to it. He's doing things like that, you know, and Father Jerry thought it was the bee's knees, you know.
With Angelika living at St Patrick's and McLaughlin completing odd jobs at the church, it was only a matter of time before their paths would cross, and the pair became friends.
She was someone that wanted to make friends, that wanted to impress, and wanted to better her life. He referred to her as his apprentice, and she was someone that trusted this person. He befriended her. She had not that many friends within the church, but she got on well with him and she trusted him.
But behind McLaughlin's apparently friendly demeanour lay a criminal past that stretched back decades. And his arrival at St Patrick's triggered a chain of events that resulted in one of the biggest cross-border police inquiries that Britain had ever seen. After failing to show up for her work on the morning of Monday the 25th of September, Angelika Kluk was reported missing. Police attended the church and questioned all of the parishioners that knew her. That included the church handyman, Pat McLaughlin. When questioned by detectives, McLaughlin claimed to know nothing about Angelika's disappearance and was allowed to leave. But when he didn't show up for work the following day, police became increasingly suspicious. To help find him, they turned to his colleague at the charity, Dennis Curran.
Everybody that works in our charity had a badge with a photograph on it, so that included Pat McLaughlin. And I get his photograph took. And that's the photograph I gave to the police. And that's the photograph they put on television.
Police have released a photograph of a man they want to speak to in connection with the disappearance of a Polish student in Glasgow. Pat McLaughlin is known to have spent time with Angelika Kluk on Sunday. The 23-year-old hasn't been seen since.
That was at 3 o'clock on the Tuesday afternoon. And at 6 o'clock it went nationwide.
Prompted by the release of the photograph, calls from the public began flooding in, and police were inundated with information. One of the calls they received made an astonishing claim.
The last person she was seen alive with was Patrick McLaughlin. His picture was published, and very quickly information came in from the public that that individual was not Patrick McLaughlin. He was the missing sex offender, Peter Tobin.
Peter Tobin was a registered sex offender, having been jailed for the sexual assault of 2 teenagers in the early 1990s. Following his release from prison in 2004, he relocated to his native Scotland, but had since disappeared after attacking a young woman in a flat in Paisley in 2005. Now, it appeared that he was one of the last people to see Angelika Kluk before she went missing.
There was a concern that she was last seen with a missing sex offender, a dangerous individual, who himself had disappeared. So when I became involved in this, I reviewed what was happening and we arranged another search of the church. And on that evening, the Friday evening, Angelica Kluk's body was found concealed under the floorboards of the church.
A small hatch in the floor near the confessional box contained a number of bin bags and tarpaulin. A closer inspection revealed that they were covering the bloodied remains of Angelica Kluk. What was a missing person inquiry was now a murder inquiry, and police forensics and pathologists were called in to provide any clues as to how Angelica may have died and who her killer might be.
Angelica Kluk was under the floorboards. She had been bound and gagged. Her hands were tied with cable ties. She was there on top of polythene sheets. She had been placed under the floor of the church.
The first step was to go and look at the hatch so I could assess in person what the crime scene entailed. And I could see Angelica's body. She was actually directly beneath the trapdoor. She had her legs bent under her from her knees. She was partially obscured with bin bags and tarpaulin. I could see her hands, and I could see that they were tied with cable ties. I could see her trousers were unfastened. Couldn't see her face at that point, but I could see a lot of blood on her hands.
Right away, police had a decision to make. Remove Angelica's body from underneath the floorboards, potentially contaminating any evidence, or forensically examine her body in situ, beneath the floor of the church.
My decision was not to remove her and to leave her under the floorboards and allow the forensic scientists and other experts to do what was required.
Standing, looking down at the hatch, it looked tiny. And I remember it was that narrow that I had a pager on my waistband, and I couldn't fit down with the pager still on my waistband. That's how little room there was. And I sat beside Angelica and then started work.
And almost immediately, Carol Rogers was able to provide detectives with vital information.
We realised pretty quickly that this was what we would term a deposition site, as opposed to the attack site where Angelica had initially been attacked. The next stage is to remove any potential DNA, so that would be more intimate samples from her body, from her breasts, from her fingers, from her face, trying to establish anyone who's been in contact with Angelica.
Carol Rogers spent more than 3 hours underneath the floorboards of the church, gathering crucial forensic evidence.
We had the information from the pathologist that Angelica had severe head injuries and had been struck to the head. So from our experience, we knew that that would create these small blood spots, which we term impact spatter. It was very apparent that it had been a violent death and that she had been injured really badly. So the next stage, crime scene-wise, was to try and establish where Angelica had been assaulted, where the initial assault had occurred. We started off by looking at the garage or the workshop, which is attached to the church, because that's where Angelica was last seen. This is a garage that is full of furniture, paint, all sorts of bits and pieces. So it's a case of going through it and looking at all the items and trying to see any evidence of an assault. And then we noticed a tiny blood spot probably a couple of millimetres in diameter on the concrete floor. And once we saw one, we saw another one and another one. So we started circling them with a black pen, and within about 10 minutes we had tens of circles on the floor. And that, in our opinion, was impact spatter, and this was where Angelica had been assaulted. We also saw cast-off blood on the ceiling, and cast-off blood occurs when a weapon has been used, and if a weapon is used to strike someone, as the weapon becomes more and more covered with blood, every time the weapon's moved back and swung back, the action of swinging the weapon and the weapon coming to a halt at the end of the swing casts blood off. And cast-off blood on the ceiling is a really good indication that a weapon with a bit of length has been used. And as it turned out, a table leg had been used.
After an intensive forensic examination, police now knew exactly where and how Angelica had been killed. With prime suspect Peter Tobin seemingly on the run, they began investigating his background. Tobin was born in 1946 in Johnston, just outside Glasgow. The youngest of 4 brothers and 3 sisters, He'd had a troubled childhood, spending time in a proved school and Borstal. In his early 20s, he was jailed for burglary and forgery. Between 1969 and 1989, Tobin married 3 times and had 2 children. But over the years, his relationships were dogged with allegations of physical and mental abuse.
Tobin started very young, sort of minor crime, petty crime. His index offence for when he became a sex offender related to serious sexual offences against young girls in Havant, and he went to prison for that. That was why he was a sex offender. And then he's out, and he's been doing other things, but none of it was reported to the police. It was only when Angelica Kluke was murdered that we started to find other things. We know about the early years when he violently assaulted one of his wives. He cut the head off a dog. All these things, on hindsight, are the earlier behavioural indications of a serial killer.
As the police investigation began unearthing more worrying information about Tobin's past, finding him became their #1 priority. Charity worker Dennis Curran was one of the last people to spend time with him, before his true identity was revealed.
The last time I saw Pat McLaughlin was on a Monday night. You would never have known that anything had happened. He was just his normal self. The only thing that was a wee bit off was when we were having our meal in McDonald's. He kept getting up and looking out the window and up and looking in the window, and he said he was late. I said, "What's the matter with you?" He says, "Oh, I'm waiting for my mate coming." He said he'd be here about 7:30 or something. Looking back now, I think he's looking to see if there's any police funds coming or anything like that, you know.
Appeals for Peter Tobin were put out nationwide.
Mr. Tobin is considered a potential risk to members of the public. Any person who sees this man is advised not to approach him.
And very quickly, a nurse in a hospital in London recognised an individual who was checked into a hospital in a different name.
Complaining of serious chest pains and using the false name James Kelly, Tobin had sought medical attention at the National Neurology and Neurosurgery Hospital in central London. But the net was closing in on him, and his bid to go undetected as a hospital patient 400 miles away would backfire.
The hospital contacted police. A Metropolitan police officer attended. He recognised him, interviewed him, cautioned him, and Tobin admitted to who he was and said that he knew why they were looking for him. For me, that was the defining moment of this investigation. And for me, the defining moment, something that I will always remember for the rest of my life.
Tobin was arrested on the 1st of October 2006. Just hours later, Angelica Kluke's body was finally removed from beneath the floorboards of St. Patrick's Church. But police still needed to prove that he was the man responsible for her brutal murder. And forensic evidence from the scene was sent to a lab for examination.
We had a DNA profile from Seaman and Angelica's swabs, so we ran that through the Scottish DNA database. And unfortunately, there was no match at all, which was disappointing.
The result was a bitter setback. But investigators refused to give up and took the crucial decision of widening the parameters of their search in an effort to solve the murder.
By that point, we had an inkling that Peter Tobin may be responsible, and he had previous in England. So although it was negative on the Scottish DNA database, we were hopeful we would get a match on the national. And first thing on the Monday morning, as soon as the database opened, we got a match from Peter Tobin.
Forensic evidence had proved that the police had Angelica's killer in custody. But senior investigating officer David Swindle questioned if an attack as brutal as that inflicted on her could really be the work of a first-time killer.
The ferocity of the killing, the way he'd concealed the body, the fact that he'd left everything under the floor, including the blood-stained knife and weapon, indicated to me that this was someone that had killed before. I decided to look at his life, and very quickly I established that Tobin travelled extensively throughout the UK. This was an individual in the 60s that had lots of cars, that could be in Brighton one minute and that same day be in Scotland. This was someone that had 20, 30 aliases. He had various associations, various wives. So I had real concerns about this individual, and we really needed to look at him closely.
Convinced that Tobin had more to tell, Senior Investigating Officer David Swindle set up a nationwide police investigation to examine Tobin's movements and activities throughout the previous decades.
Operation Anagram involved every police force in the UK. So basically we're looking at the individual, Tobin, the killer. What happened when he was in an area? Did someone go missing in that area? Was there an unresolved homicide? What did the victim look like? It was a brilliant example of information sharing between police forces.
Letters and case notes were sent to all 43 British police forces. It wasn't long before David and his team would make their first breakthrough, and it was one very close to home, 35 miles along the M8 in Bathgate, West Lothian.
When we're looking at Tobin's life, we find out that he lived in Bathgate, a town in Scotland, short distance from where a teenager had gone missing, a massive missing in person inquiry years ago. For me, I thought, he's got to be connected. That, in my mind, was another defining moment in my career. And that was something that led to further investigations and pushed Anagram.
In 1991, Bathgate became the central focus of the biggest missing persons investigation in Scottish history, following the disappearance of 15-year-old schoolgirl Vicky Hamilton.
Vicky was a teenager from the Falkirk area of Scotland, a very normal teenager. She lived at home with her mother, her younger brother and sister. She was educated at high school in Falkirk and was a very popular girl.
On Sunday the 10th of February, Vicky was returning home after a weekend at her sister's house in nearby Livingston. The hour-long journey back home to Falkirk required her to change buses in the centre of Bathgate.
From the start, she wanted to do this on her own. She was getting independent, you know, and wanted to go into the big world, basically. And when she left Livingston that night, her sister put her on the bus, and she got to Bathgate, and after Bathgate, that was it. Nobody had seen her.
Vicky alighted from the bus in the Steelyard. She was supposed to be going to the bus stop opposite the police station. We know that Vicky started to make that journey. We also know that she went to the chip shop where she bought chips, and that she sat on a seat in the Steelyard, which was really the last sighting of Vicky.
I can remember as though it was yesterday, aye. Well, it was one of the biggest searches in Scotland. They stopped traffic in Bathgate, put out pamphlets, spoke to lorry drivers that left Bathgate that night, trains that left, buses that left. But, I mean, the public were really helpful. It was in all the pubs, people speaking about it, you know, and no, there was nothing come of it.
The only potential clue that police had about Vicky's whereabouts was found 20 miles away in the Scottish capital.
A week after Vicky Hamilton went missing, her purse was found in St Andrew's Square in Edinburgh. The purse was examined at that time forensically with the techniques that were available. However, nothing was found on the purse.
Extensive inquiries were carried out on the streets of Bathgate, but the police could find no details about Vicky's final movements, and with no other leads to follow, the case went cold.
It was devastating. Everybody was devastated. We all feared the worst. We knew there's something sinister had happened to her, because there's no way she would have did what she did. She just disappeared.
Tobin's trial for the murder of Angelica got underway at Edinburgh High Court in March 2007. Following a 6-week hearing, he was found guilty of the rape and murder of Angelica Kluk and sentenced to serve a minimum of 21 years in prison. Despite being safely behind bars for the murder of Angelica, detectives remained convinced that Tobin was not revealing all, and the nationwide probe into his past continued. The investigation revealed that in 1986, Age 40, Peter Tobin married his third wife, who was 16 years old. After 3 years in Brighton, they relocated to a house on Robertson Avenue in Bathgate, just a 5-minute drive away from the town centre, where 15-year-old Vicky Hamilton was last seen alive in February 1991.
Peter Tobin lived in Bathgate from 1989 until 1991, initially with his wife. During his stay in Bathgate, he was unemployed. It's known that he bought and sold second-hand cars to make some money. And we also know that about 6 months prior to Vicky Hamilton going missing, his wife left him and that he lived in the house alone.
Armed with this new information, detectives from West Lothian CID made the crucial decision to search the property in a bid to find anything that would link Peter Tobin to Vicky's disappearance.
The search was centred on looking for bloodstains or DNA which could prove whether or not Vicky Hamilton had been in that house. During the early part of the search, items were being removed from the house. The loft area was searched and items removed. During that search, there was a knife found which had fallen down or been secreted between a roof joist and a brick wall. Sometime later, the forensic examination revealed a piece of skin on the knife, which, when examined, produced a DNA profile of Vicky Hamilton. The discovery of the knife was hugely important as it took us forward in relation to Vicky's disappearance. The fact that the knife was in the house which Tobin occupied showed that he may have been responsible for her disappearance and possible demise.
Tobin, already in custody for the murder of Angelica Kluk, was now interviewed about the disappearance of teenager Vicky Hamilton.
As Tobin was being interviewed, I was in an adjoining room where I could view the interview on camera. During the interview, I felt that Tobin was very manipulative and at times was trying to control the direction of the interview. One of the things he did during the interview was to say that he had a sore back and that he was unable to sit. This allowed him to stand, and he stood for the whole interview. And it was quite noticeable that he was standing above the officers who were asking him questions. The officers had to continually bring him back to where they wanted the interview to go.
Is there any way that you can assist us in finding this girl now?
Eventually, Tobin was questioned about the knife that had been found in the loft of his Bathgate home.
The knife was produced and he was asked questions regarding it. His initial response was to admit that he had owned a knife similar to that, which he did without any prompting at all. Once the significance of the knife was explained to Tobin, he changed his story completely and denied any knowledge of the knife.
When Tobin was interviewed in relation to Vicky Hamilton, he became aggressive during that interview. He denied knowing her. It was put to him various things that could link him to her. His DNA was on the knife found in his house at Bathgate, but he was adamant and very controlling towards the officers and quite aggressive towards the interviewing officers that he didn't know her.
As I say, I've never met her. You know what I mean? I've never.
You have no knowledge of where?
No.
Peter Tobin gave up nothing in relation to his involvement or knowledge of Vicky Hamilton. He denied very, very strongly that he had ever seen Vicky Hamilton. He stated that he had never been in her company, and he also stated that he was not responsible for her disappearance. At that point, I was 100% sure that Tobin was telling lies.
Looking at the interview of Peter Tobin confirmed to me that this was an individual that would admit nothing and was someone that was very controlling and someone that had committed other crimes.
And detectives were also able to call on developments in forensic science to re-examine Vicky's purse, found on the streets of Edinburgh back in 1991.
It was decided that we would examine the purse for DNA using new techniques. These techniques provided 2 DNA samples on the purse, one on either side. At the time they were found, I was informed that the DNA profiles were male. They were very similar to Peter Tobin's, However, they were not Peter Tobin's DNA. I was able to tell the scientists that Tobin actually had two offspring, two male offspring, and inquiries were carried out with both these men, and the DNA found on the purse matched perfectly one of Tobin's sons, who at the time Vicky went missing, he was 3 years old. The forensic examination revealed a piece of skin on the knife, which, when examined, produced a DNA profile of Vicky Hamilton.
In a disturbing twist, it appeared that after abducting Vicky, Tobin had given his 3-year-old toddler Vicky's purse to play with. This explained the presence of his son's DNA.
The interview concluded with Peter Tobin being charged with the abduction of Vicky Hamilton. At that time, we had not recovered Vicky's body.
Despite denying any knowledge of what happened to Vicky Hamilton, the forensic evidence found in the house was enough to convince police that he'd been responsible for her abduction, and they could now piece together the teenager's final movements.
Although it can never be proved, the probability is that she probably stopped Peter Tobin in Bathgate and asked him for directions. A trusting soul was Vicky, and I believe that she may have gone with him, thinking that she was going to be helped.
Detectives now believed they knew how Vicky had gone missing and who was responsible. But with Tobin uncooperative, there was still no indication as to where her body might be. As detectives in West Lothian worked on building the case against Tobin, Operation Anagram continued to track the killer's past, and officers believed they may have found a link between Tobin and the historic disappearance of 18-year-old Dinah McNichol, over 500 miles away in the southeast of England.
Dinah had gone away for the weekend to attend a music festival down in Liphook in Hampshire, and she'd gone away with some friends to attend this festival. Whilst at the festival, she met a young man. As a single girl, that was fine. She got on very well with this young man. Her friends needed to get back to London at the end of the festival, but some campers were staying on for an extra day, and Dinah decided to stay on for the extra day with the young man. They left. Neither of them had any money or transport, so they decided that they would hitchhike home. He lived in a different area to where Dinah lived, so they partied. So they got a lift on the A3, and then they parted company on the M25, and that was the last time anyone saw Dinah alive.
Police launched a major search for Dinah, but found nothing. Her disappearance was a mystery, and her family immediately feared the worst.
We knew pretty much straight away that something serious had happened. Back in those days, there was no mobile phones or anything like that, but we were all very good at picking the phone up and ringing in and just saying if we were going to be late or anything at all like that.
When she was 6, Dinah's mother died in a car crash, and on her 18th birthday, Dinah became entitled to £2,000, compensation for her mother's accident. Following her disappearance, one of the very few leads that police had was that Dinah's bank cards continued to be used after she went missing. Back in 1991, they were unable to use this information to pinpoint a suspect. But 16 years later, Operation Anagram was able to place Peter Tobin in the very same towns that the cash withdrawals were made, and crucially at the same time. 6 weeks after Vicky's disappearance in February 1991, Peter Tobin moved to the south coast to be nearer his young son. He moved into a house in Margate and quickly settled into life in the seaside town.
Well, I first met Peter Tobin 1991 when he moved in next door. Pretty average bloke, nothing special, nothing untoward. It's like any other new neighbour then. He was very friendly. He was very friendly with most of the neighbours. If I hadn't got a tool or something like I wanted to borrow one, yeah, Pete would have it, and likewise he would lend one off me. We spent most of the summer chatting on his doorstep. So yes, we had lots of chats, but the only way I can describe him was he was like a Walter Mitty character. He came up with weird and wonderful tales and stories about what he'd done and where he'd been and so on, so much so that to the end I got to the stage where I'll shrug my shoulders, and that was Pete.
When, as part of Operation Anagram, David was questioned about his seemingly perfect neighbour, He recalled one conversation in particular, which would provide detectives with a crucial break in the investigation.
So I glanced out the top window one day and spotted him digging a trench in the back garden. So being curious, and I went down and leant across and said, "Are you going for Australia, Pete?" Because it was quite a deep trench. And he said, "No," and he said, "I'm building a sandpit for the youngster when he comes up." A couple of days later, it was all filled in. So I said, "What happened to your sandpit, Pete?" "Oh," he said, "the social worker said it was dangerous for the youngster." Then in 2007, we had a visit from the police, and they wanted to know whether Tobin did any housework, DIY, and then I remembered the sandpit, and I mentioned this to them, and they seemed to be very interested in that.
With police able to establish that Tobin was living in the south of England at the time of Diana's disappearance, Essex police started an extensive search of the house and excavated the garden at Irwin Drive.
Operation Anagram investigations indicated that Dinah McNichol could have been killed and buried in Irwin Drive in Margate, so excavations and searches were conducted there with the hope of finding her.
Essex Police contacted my father. I think they were working in conjunction with Scottish Police at the time, and I think they'd received a tip-off from the police in Scotland, and they were going to start to investigate the grounds and garden of a property in Margate. And they said to us, we believe strongly that we are going to find Dinah's remains within this property.
They literally took the garden to pieces, and we had policemen round the back alleyway. There was police guarding the house. I even had to sign to get in and out of my own house, so it was pretty much a lockdown.
It wasn't long before the police made a gruesome discovery. And just hours later, detectives would make a statement that would surprise everyone.
Short announcement. I can't take questions afterwards, but it is a short announcement. There has been a significant discovery within the last couple of hours.
I was contacted by Essex Police, who informed me that they'd removed a body to the mortuary, but that it was evident that it wasn't the body of Dinah McNichol. Due to jewellery worn by the body and physical description, it became very apparent that, although we assumed this was the body of Dinah McNichol, it was in fact the body of Vicky Hamilton.
I could not believe that her body had ended up in a garden in Kent. For me, that is something that really put it into my mind about Tobin and his ability to move throughout the UK killing people.
Unbelievably, 16 years after vanishing without a trace from the streets of Bathgate in Scotland, the body of Vicky Hamilton had been discovered almost 500 miles away at Tobin's former home in Margate. And just like the murder of Angelica Kluke, all the evidence pointed to a violent and savage attack.
Vicky's body had been dissected and was in two parts, a torso and legs. Each part had been placed within polythene bags, 13 bags around the torso and 11 bags on the legs. This process preserved Vicky's body because it kept the body free from any oxygen. And as such, Vicky was easily recognisable.
We'd been prepared to find Dinah, and then they've told us that another poor girl, her remains had been found. So it was a mixture of feelings, because obviously we'd been hoping that they would find her, and then some other family has had to go through all of the pain and everything else of them discovering her body as well.
The whereabouts of Dinah McNichol remained a mystery, but after 17 years of heartbreaking uncertainty, detectives in Scotland could finally tell Michael Hamilton the truth about what had happened to his daughter Vicky.
It was devastating when we heard the news that it was Vicky. You say to yourself, we're never going to see her again, but when you get the news, that is devastating news for to be told that she's dead and she's been found. And it was really devastating, really, it was.
The horrific discovery of Vicky's body would finally allow police to close the book on one of Scotland's most high-profile and longest-running missing person investigations.
Our case was now complete with the recovery of Vicky's body. The further evidence that we found in Margate allowed us then to charge Tobin not only with Vicky's abduction, but also with rape and murder.
And for the family of Dinah McNichol, the wait for answers was almost over. Back in Margate, police were still convinced that Peter Tobin's former back garden held the key to her disappearance.
The police had informed us that they had very good intelligence that they would find Dinah's remains within the property of the house in Margate, and we believed them.
And just days after finding Vicky's body, police suspicions were proved right.
There has been a significant discovery within the last couple of hours here at Irvine Drive. There has been another body discovered.
Police later confirmed that the second body found buried at Irvine Drive was that of Dinah McNichol. Her body had been tightly bound, gagged and wrapped in 16 heavy-duty plastic bags, which were found to have Peter Tobin's fingerprints on them. And like Vicky Hamilton, the post-mortem revealed that she had been drugged before being murdered.
The police asked if we would like to go down and visit the house in Margate. My dad was quite frail at this stage. I went down with him to view the house. He went into the garden to actually see where it happened. In fact, we both went into the garden to look at where it had happened, and just see where Dinah's last resting place was.
Despite evidence of the sickening ordeal that his sister had been subjected to, the discovery of Dinah's body brought to an end 17 years of pain to Dan and the rest of her family.
When they informed us that the second remains were Dinah's, it was a massive weight off our shoulders. It was a relief. We were able to hold a funeral in our local village, invite lots of her school friends, and it was a joyous occasion, really. My dad sang at the funeral, and it was really nice just to be able to say goodbye to Dinah and sort of share that with friends and family as well. Dinah probably would have had a fantastic life. She had everything to look forward to. She was cut down right in the prime of her life. It's such a shame. It's such a shame. My children are missing an auntie and potentially cousins, and all of us are missing a sister as well.
There's no day goes by that I don't think about Vicky. I think about Vicky every day, all the time. I mean, I've not just lost Vicky, I've lost grandmates too. I could have grandchildren, and enjoying their life, them enjoying theirs, and her. But no, I never had the chance to get that one that far because of the evil man that he was.
In December 2008, Tobin, already serving a life sentence for the rape and murder of Angelica Klook, was found guilty of the murder of Vicky Hamilton. 12 months later, he was convicted of the murder of Dinah McNichol, with the jury taking just 13 minutes to reach their verdict.
Every day we went to the trial at Chelmsford Crown Court, and it was the first time I'd got to actually see Peter Tobin. I'd seen photographs of him in the newspapers, but it was the first time I got to see him, and he just looked like a small, angry old man.
When he was sentenced up in Dundee, that was the best day of my life, for a long, long time in my life. Because I knew at his age, there was no way he was coming back out of the prison.
Tobin is one of around 70 prisoners in the UK to be serving a whole life tariff, meaning he will never be allowed to seek parole and will die behind bars. In 2018, he was diagnosed with cancer, and over the past 2 years, his condition is understood to have deteriorated. Despite this, he has still never admitted to any of his crimes. And the man who set up Operation Anagram believes that Tobin will take more secrets to the grave.
Tobin has never admitted his crimes. He's a coward, he's a predator, he's a murderer, he's a serial killer. He's never admitted what he's done. He has no respect for the victims or their families.
I'm not interested. You're not interested in helping families who might have missed ones that you might have information about? I couldn't give a... No, that's it. You have no humanity about you, do you?
Throughout his life, Peter Tobin often appeared to be a likeable, helpful and trustworthy man, a good Samaritan who was quick to make friends and charm neighbours. In reality, he was a cold and calculated serial killer who preyed on the vulnerability of his victims, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. and destroying the lives of countless families across the country.
Peter Tobin didn't just take my daughter away, he took my life away. He ruined my life, as far as I'm concerned. He ruined it completely. I've lost everything. And I've lost Vicky.
I'm not particularly religious, and you know, the whole eye for an eye thing doesn't really wash with me, but I'm just confident that the justice system will never let him out, and he will have to see the rest of his days behind bars.
Personally, I believe Peter Tobin is one of the most dangerous men in the country. He's been convicted of 3 murders of young females. Very, very difficult to prove, but I believe that he may be responsible for other crimes.
I was a police officer for 34 years, and in that long career, I never met anyone as evil and dangerous as Peter Tobin.
Just an absolutely despicable act, one of pure evil.
I've never come across anybody who could be so callous and so cold.
In the space of 4 months, this killer's rampage was so violent and unpredictable, it sparked a nationwide manhunt.
We had grenades, which had not happened before in that sort of attack.
What started as a feud between 2 rival Manchester gangs.
They were taking down posters in and around the Droylsden area saying that if you grass to the police, you will not live long enough to spend £50,000.
Ended with 2 female police officers being brutally murdered.
This was the first time that 2 female police officers had been killed on duty in mainland Britain.
With a hoax call to police that lured the innocent women to their deaths.
Someone's just threw a big concrete slab through that window and ran off.
If you're feeling numb, you're feeling shocked, you're feeling anger, you name it, every emotion you can think of is going through your head.
We're just ordinary people. We are just ordinary people.
Dale Cregan was born in Tameside, Greater Manchester, in 1983. His life of crime started at an early age, when he apparently began dealing cannabis while he was still at school. By the time he reached his early 20s, he allegedly developed a strong interest in weapons, particularly knives, and was earning large amounts of money from dealing cocaine.
Having spoken to a number of people that knew Cregan as he was growing up, I think it is fair to say that signs were there that this was an individual that was going off the rails.
Cregan built a reputation in his community through intimidation. With a distinct appearance, he bragged about losing one of his eyes in a street fight.
There was some pretty horrendous acts of violence that he had engaged in, not using firearms, but using other weapons, which to ordinary human beings would be absolutely abhorrent and unthinkable, which gives you an indication of the kind of mind and individual that we were dealing with.
Cregan moved to a town called Droylsden in Greater Manchester and straight onto the turf of local gang leader David Short. Before long, tensions brewed as Cregan allegedly became an enforcer for a rival family, the Atkinsons. A turf war began which saw unprecedented levels of violence, including people being shot at, run over and stabbed. A dangerous feud that ultimately became deadly in 2012.
He started off from a dispute between 2 families, but a dispute which had a long history of animosity as well. Often, perhaps, the public isn't fully aware of how actually a lot of crime is generated by crime groups who create the market in stolen goods, create the market in drugs, who get involved in all forms of illegal activity. Power bases, through their threats, through their intimidation, through their reputation, will try and rule areas, intimidate areas, and almost try and create an alternative economy and an alternative, almost criminal justice system.
The violent history between the 2 families had allegedly ended in a truce in 2003, but 9 years later erupted once more.
It started from a dispute over a woman and an argument over a woman.
If somebody had made an advance towards somebody, that person had not taken them up on that particular offer, that was seen as disrespect. And we do believe that she allegedly had said she was going to get the boys to sort this out.
12 days later, on the 25th of May, This argument led to a fatal outcome. 23-year-old Mark Short was at the Cotton Tree pub in Droylsden, Manchester, with his friends and family. Just before closing time, a masked gunman entered the pub. Mark Short and his friends were targeted with a hail of bullets.
I remember quite distinctly it had been a long day and I'd driven home and I'd literally arrived home when the phone rang to say that there'd been a murder.
I think the gunman was in and out of the pub in under a minute. It was around 24 seconds. Mark Short was shot in the chest. 3 other people were shot in that pub. And by chance, David Short was in the toilet at the time the gunman came into the pub. He came out to find a scene of absolute devastation, and Mark Short died there in his arms.
The murder had clearly been seen by a number of other customers in the pub, but they refused to talk to the police.
Because they're talking about people that were in criminal associations that were largely the witnesses, who did not want to speak to the police, where clearly steps had been taken to obviously cover the tracks of those who had committed the attack, and it was a very, very difficult investigation.
Rumours also began to circulate that Mark Short had been killed by accident and that the murderer was looking for someone else. With some witnesses to the crime potentially aiding the suspect, the police could not rely on their statements. So they turned to evidence and a call from a member of the public.
First of all, we had on CCTV the vehicle that was used in the Cotton Tree murder, and that was caught on CCTV. That was abandoned and burnt out some distance away. But there was clothing that was left near the area of that vehicle being abandoned, and we had information that that clothing had been dumped. We didn't know at that time, and nor did the person that called us, that that was the clothing that had been used by the offenders in this particular case. But it was from that clothing that we were able to pick up some of the DNA traces that led us to, ultimately, to Cregan and his associates. Well, what we understand is that there is a long-standing feud between the Shorts and the Atkinsons. And actually Cregan was part of, we believe, part of Atkinson's. He was hired muscle, if you like, for the Atkinson family. I suppose we will never know the truth, if that is right, to think that that was the start of a chain of events that led to the murders of 2 police officers. I think it is it's a sad indictment on society.
The way these things work is that often, the people clearly who are tasked with carrying out the violent attack have not been, originally directly involved in that first incident which showed the disrespect. And that's obviously one, a means of distancing, the people who've commissioned the attack from those who actually carry out the attack. And that's often, again, what makes these sorts of investigations quite difficult.
Rumours of Dale Cregan working for the Atkinson family had been in the community for a while. But despite having a reputation as an enforcer, he wasn't known for this level of violence.
I think, to be fair, in my service in the police, you can see these people that engage in low to moderate level violence. And I think, to be fair, there comes a tipping point where they will then engage in something that takes them over the edge, where actually it's easier to carry on than it is to try and come back. Well, Cregan was known to the police anyway. He has a long criminal history, so he was well known to us.
It was not top of the pile, so there was quite a lot of intelligence about him, and clearly these 2 families were very well known about, but on the whole, it wasn't particularly active or particularly high on the radar.
Police studied the material they now had in an attempt to link Cregan to the attack. After the shooting, he had quickly left the country. But on his return to the UK, officers were waiting to arrest him. They finally had a key suspect in custody, but believed other people had also helped in the crime. Investigations continued into at least 4 other men known to Cregan.
We were always very worried that there could be further attacks. The sort of challenges we had was clearly, number one, finding the people responsible, people who are highly skilled in covering their tracks, who will have a wide web of associates who will protect them. We then had a huge number of people who were potentially at threat, because, you know, we didn't know who next within the criminal associations would then be targeted. So there was an enormously difficult situation of literally hundreds of people on both sides of this dispute who are now at risk, who had to be warned about their risk, and in certain situations had to be protected.
What had begun as a small-scale dispute between two families had turned into one of Greater Manchester Police's largest investigations. And Cregan, one of their main suspects, was about to become a free man.
We couldn't at that point get sufficient evidence together, which would have then enabled the Crown Prosecution Service to have then charged them. And that is why they were then let out on bail. And that is, whether we like it or not, a common occurrence.
A young father's death increased tension in the community, but officers had to release Dale Cregan from police custody without charge. However, their investigation into two other associates of his led to their arrests. 27-year-old Luke Livesey from Hattersley and 38-year-old Damien Gorman from Glossop were charged with the murder of Mark Short and 3 attempted murders on his friends. Police believed they finally had their suspects in custody, until another gruesome attack occurred. On the 10th of August, the father of the murdered man, 46-year-old David Short, was outside his house in Clayton, Greater Manchester.
10 weeks after the attack on the pub, David Short was unloading some furniture from his car when he was shot at 10 times with a Glock pistol and a military M75 hand grenade. A Yugoslavian military hand grenade was used against him. And after the autopsy, a report revealed that it caused such severe tissue damage that there was just no way he would have ever survived those injuries.
The series of incidents were shocking in terms of, you know, the level of violence which was used. You know, the fact that we had grenades used, you know, which, you know, had not happened before in that sort of attack, really in the British mainland in that way. That said, you know, organised crime groups are about using extremes of violence. That's how serious criminals rule the roost. The use of grenades created huge challenges for us in terms of how our firearms officers were then going to be able to you know, capture somebody who potentially was able to use that type of weaponry.
And I remember vividly seeing an image afterwards of a van that was used in that attack. The side of the van, the roof, was absolutely peppered with holes from the shrapnel of one of these military hand grenades. So anybody anywhere near one of them would have stood absolutely no chance. But that image of that van sticks in my head, and I think at that point I realised just how dangerous this man was.
Once the second murder occurred, we then realised that we had some significant issues that we had to deal with very, very quickly.
Well, David Short survived the attack on the pub in which Mark Short was killed. Greater Manchester Police then issued 3 threat-to-life warnings to David Short, and they clearly believed that his life was in grave danger. That isn't something that's taken lightly, but on 3 occasions they told David Short that they believed there was a credible threat to his life.
Sadly, we are not unfamiliar with gangland type murders, and often with these murders it is gang members shooting each other using traditional or conventional firearms. The difference with this one was the use of hand grenades.
The use of military grenades was not something the force had seen before and wasn't a readily available weapon. In just weeks, a father and son had been murdered in cold blood. As police built the evidence from this crime scene and pieced it together with intelligence from Mark Short's murder, certain suspects' names were prominent again, one being Dale Cregan.
In terms of how we got him and linked him to these offences, it was through forensics. First of all, how we actually got the link there. But secondly, there was an incident moments after he'd murdered David Short. Literally moments after, he went to an address in Luke Road and was caught on CCTV with, we believe, the firearm that he used to kill David Short, and the CCTV footage also caught him taking the pin out of the grenade and throwing it at an address in Luke Road.
What started off as this, supposed disrespect for a woman, then had escalated, to people being shot in the pub, and then to grenades being used. It was an extremely unusual and clearly violent event.
Before police could arrest Cregan, he fled and went into hiding, sparking an urgent nationwide hunt. It was clear that this dangerous man had a large network of people working with him and willing to protect his whereabouts. One of these people was an associate called Anthony Wilkinson, who had disappeared at the same time.
It was a very complex investigation because we now had somebody that we knew was on the loose. We knew that he was capable of using hand grenades, which had never been seen before in mainland UK. He was not afraid to kill, murder, maim.
The sort of challenges we had was clearly, number one, finding the people responsible, people who, again, are highly skilled in covering their tracks, who will have a wide web of associates who will protect them and find them accommodation and move them to other parts of the country, whatever it might be. People who are extremely aware of the tactics that we use and extremely skilled in trying to frustrate them.
With advice from the military, we knew that they had a kill range of 50 metres and a maiming range of 100 metres. Potentially, we still had these hand grenades possibly in Cregan's possession, and we'd seen the level of violence that he was prepared to use. My fear was you throw one of these grenades into a public house, into a nightclub, into a police carrier, you have killed everybody. It was the level of weaponry that was now available and on the streets of Manchester, which was frightening, and I have to say, kept me awake at night.
Cregan at that point was identified as a national threat, but in terms of getting national coverage, part of the challenge we had was that at that time it was the Olympics, so all the media focus was on the Olympics, quite understandably.
I think it's fair to say that Cregan was quite savvy, but he was being supported by even more savvy criminal individuals. And so some of the techniques that he was using to avoid detection, so for example, using phones once and throwing that phone away and buying another phone, communicating through different channels, whether it's through games consoles or whatever, he employed a number of techniques and was advised by others using those various techniques that made it very, very difficult for us to actually track where he was or where he was going to be.
Officers believed Cregan and Wilkinson could be on the run together. Suspecting that they could be responsible for 2 murders and had the use of such destructive weapons, the police came up with an unprecedented tactic to try to catch them.
At the time in 2012, it was, of course, the London Olympics. They were dominating the news agenda, but certainly locally in the northwest, there was a growing concern and attention that there was clearly a very dangerous man here, and I think it became increasingly clear, certainly over the course of that August, that police were particularly keen to track him down and take him into custody.
The first reward discussed was £25,000. I recognised pretty quickly that £25,000 would not be enough to surrender this individual, I think mainly because of the fear that was in the community. The reward was actually up to £50,000. I remember having a conversation saying, you're going to have to do something which is unprecedented too in terms of reward. This is going to have to be life-changing. Let's say it's £1 million. Because I remember my officers coming in and saying that they were taking down posters in and around the Droylsden area saying that if you grass to the police, you will not live long enough to spend £50,000. The posters that were being put up was indicative of the kind of fear that existed within that community, so we had to do something which was pretty unique.
Well, a reward in this country is rare, but this was particularly rare in that it was being offered not for the conviction of Dale Cregan, but merely for his arrest. And it was also only to be given to somebody who called Crime Stoppers with information that, of course, led to the arrest of Dale Cregan. So it was very clear very quickly that police were very keen to track him down and to take Dale Cregan into custody.
£50,000 was eventually agreed. in the hope that somebody would lead officers to Cregan and Wilkinson's whereabouts, and time was running out.
With little information still coming forward, they took the extraordinary step of putting on display £50,000 cash, their biggest ever reward.
One anonymous phone call to Crime Stoppers, that's all it's going to take. And we will pay you £50,000 for that information, which leads to the arrest of Cregan and Wilkinson.
Now the threat had escalated to an incredible proportion that we had over 100 people that we considered now to be at risk because of the links with these gangs. Over 100 people that we considered were going to be the next target.
Because of the high risk to the public, police struggled to protect the sheer number of people who could potentially become the killer's next victim. And despite the substantial reward, the local community remained silent. Cregan and Wilkinson were nowhere to be found, but there was a breakthrough. Another suspect, 24-year-old Jermaine Ward, was arrested and charged with David Short's murder. However, police were confident that he hadn't acted alone and needed to find the other dangerous men quickly.
There was a lot of pressure put on various associates, family members. Clearly there was a huge number of rumours circulating, there was material on social media. Even to this day there are people who will tell you that they knew where he was. You know, we know that's untrue. It does show clearly that if you are determined to evade the police, if you are pretty skilled in some of those evasion techniques because of your previous criminal history, because of what you've been able to pick up about police tactics each time when you were arrested and convicted, because material is disclosed to you in the court process, then clearly that is an enormous challenge for policing and for law enforcement in general. Clearly we've examined a lot of our tactics since.
You couldn't go into Manchester city centre without seeing Dale Cregan's image, so his image was plastered across billboards. I remember vans with screens were being driven around with that appeal for information and Dale Cregan's very distinct image on these posters.
Despite a national appeal, a hunt involving many police forces in the UK and a reward for tens of thousands of pounds, weeks went by with no leads on Cregan or his associate Anthony Wilkinson.
He was on the run with Anthony Wilkinson. We knew that he had a number of people that had assisted him in the preparation of this crime and committing crimes, and so we had all of those individuals that we were looking for as well.
The search for both men stretched across the UK and Europe, but they still evaded capture, until 3 weeks after David Short's murder, one man finally surrendered.
It was fair to say that after Anthony Wilkinson surrendered himself to custody, that Cregan was the main player. He was the one that we feared would create the most problems for the communities and would create most problems for us.
We've been under huge pressure. You know, it was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We put into place a number of measures in terms of trying to quantify the risk. We had a lot more armed officers. We had armed officers from other parts of the country, but what we clearly couldn't do is just abandon normal policing.
5 weeks after Dale Cregan had gone missing, Greater Manchester Emergency Services received a phone call from a member of the public complaining about damage to his property.
Someone just threw a big concrete slab through that window and ran off.
Were you in the room where it came through, or did you hear the bang?
No, I was upstairs. I looked out the window and seen one boy running off.
Is it a kitchen window that's gone through?
Yeah, kitchen.
Local police constables Fiona Bone and Nicola Hughes were asked to go to the caller's aid.
So I'll try and get up there as soon as, if there's a possibility he's still knocking about.
All right then, thanks very much.
Okay.
I'll wait. I'll be waiting.
With the hindsight of knowing what that call was, it's incredibly chilling to know that that was a man luring police officers to their deaths. He knew exactly what he was doing. Those police officers couldn't have had any idea of the danger that they were about to put themselves into, but the end of that call was absolutely chilling.
The two young officers drove just 3 miles from Hyde Police Station to the address in Hattersley.
So 10 o'clock, I was sat in the room, chairing the meeting, and we were discussing just various things around police in the division. And there was no knock on the door just literally burst open, and one of the detectives from the CID, or from the investigative teams within Tameside, was stood at the door, and he just said, "Boss, you better come out, there's something happening at Hyde." And he didn't really know what it was, and I didn't know what it was, but you could see that there was something significant. Who was saying, "I think it's something to do with Cregan." And I turned the radio on, hoping that this was just real positive news. I mean, in my mind, I was thinking this is good news, you know, that we've caught him, or he's handed himself in, or whatever. The police radio took just a few seconds to fire into life, and as it did, the words that came over the radio, I'll never forget. And it was one of the sergeants who was saying, "They're shot. They're shot. Get an ambulance. Get an ambulance." And I remember thinking that just doesn't make sense. And the radio came on. I heard the radio operator at the same time trying to call a call sign of Golf Mike 41, Golf Mike 41, which was Nicola and Fiona's call sign, because the call taker had obviously realised that those officers had gone to an address in that area, but I don't think had made the link at that point, and I certainly hadn't made the link.
The police operator got no response from the two officers.
And I remember saying to the sergeant, what's going on? And he just said, "She's dead. She's dead." And I remember trying to speak to him and saying, "Who's dead?" And the phone went off. And I rang the call back. I rang the phone back immediately, and it was the inspector this time that answered the phone, and he said, "Fiona's dead, and we're working on Nicola now." Cregan opened the door and immediately began firing this Glock 9mm weapon at Fiona and Nicola. No words were exchanged, he just simply started firing with this extended magazine on this weapon.
Fiona tried to use her taser gun to stop Cregan, but neither woman stood a chance. Despite colleagues rushing to help, Fiona lost her life at the scene, whilst colleagues desperately tried to save Nicola. Before the help arrived, the perpetrator fled the scene, leaving the victims to die.
We've then got Cregan, who'd driven to Hyde Police Station and had handed himself in. Did he have hand grenades on him? Was that police station now going to get blown up with hand grenades? Was the vehicle that he was in, was that booby-trapped with these grenades? Did he still have the weapon on him?
As an officer rushed to arrest the murderer, the enormity of the situation was taking hold.
I've got one officer that an inspector is telling me is dead. I've got another officer that they're saying is working on, that was Nicola. What did working on mean? It seemed I was just stood there forever, and almost as if I was looking down on the situation. And I feel in a way quite annoyed at myself about that, because you would think that you would know what to do. But I've said this many a time, we're just ordinary people. We are just ordinary people.
I was driving home and then a phone call came up, and it was an unknown number on my hands-free in the car. And it was this, a DCI from Manchester. And he said, "I need to speak to you." And then I could sense in his voice there was something, and I said, "Why? What's happening?" He says, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm driving home from work." I'd seen Nicola the night before, and I thought she said to me, "I'm off for 5 days now." But she said, "I'm on for 5 days now." Obviously, I misheard it. He said, "Where are you? I'll come and get you, I'll come and get you." And he said, "You know, there's no easy way of saying it." And he didn't actually say the words, but he just said there's no easy way of saying it. And then the next, 2 or 3 miles were, I don't know, a blur.
a nightmare.
23-year-old Nicola Hughes lost her life in hospital, despite desperate attempts to save her.
Nicola and Fiona were available to take the call because they were on duty that day. They took the call and because of it, they lost their lives.
As Nicola's family tried to process the devastating news, police rushed to contact Fiona's parents, 150 miles away on the Isle of Man.
We were sitting, having lunch, and we put the news on. And the headlines were 2 police women had been killed in Manchester. And fairly vague, but hey, Fiona's police woman in Manchester. Oh, should I give her a ring, should I not? And then there was a knock on the door. And that was it. So I opened the door to a police sergeant and a nice young police lady and said, "You may as well come in then." Because we knew what it was about as soon as they knocked on the door. It was literally seconds of pre-warning. It really wasn't long. We were obviously fairly shocked, but I mean, their faces were quite, you know, this is not the news we wish to bring.
We'd called all of the team back in off the streets, and they were all sat in the canteen at Ashton Police Station. And we walked into the canteen, and they were all sat there. And you know, as you can imagine, you could have heard a pin drop. And we had to obviously give the news and the devastation that created. That they just then to be informed that they'd lost 2 of their colleagues on, you know, what had been just a call to a routine burglary or damage. Just the level of grief in that room was palpable. And then, of course, you've got to offer them the support. Clearly, they couldn't go back onto the streets.
Gradually, the horrific news started to make the headlines across the country, as everyone tried to absorb the magnitude of what had happened.
This morning, a week after the sad deaths of Nicola and Fiona, we held a vigil close to the place where they were attacked. It was great to see so many colleagues attend, but also particularly so many ordinary members of the public of the communities of Hattersley and Mottram.
I think it absolutely horrified the nation because this was the story of 2 young female police officers who were unarmed. They attended what they believed was a routine call-out, and because of it, they lost their lives.
It's difficult to describe how you feel. Obviously, if you're feeling numb, you're feeling shocked, you're feeling anger, you name it, every emotion you could think of is going through your head. I think she's so easygoing. I think that was one of the massive qualities, that she was really easygoing. She was so wise, she was intelligent, witty.
She moved to Manchester, where she became a special. And she enjoyed being a special 3 or 4 nights a week, or whatever it was she did. And she really liked it. So from the special, she tried joining the police force, and eventually she did. She liked it. Anything that was a bit risky, dodgy, or could upset anyone wasn't told to us. We only got to hear the good bits.
As the country was left reeling from the multiple murders, Fiona and Nicola's colleagues still had the burden of investigating the crime and piecing together Cregan's movements before the attack. And what came to light was more chilling than they expected.
Cregan held these people hostage with threat of murdering them and blowing up the daughter and all the rest of it. He allowed the occupant to go to work that morning, but had threatened to kill his partner and child if he had called the police. Cregan reportedly had said he was sorry that it was women and he wished it had been men. I want to make the point that Cregan saw those officers walking towards that address and had a number of opportunities not to engage with those officers. And if you look at Nicola, who was 23 at the time, who just looks like a child, and Fiona, who was 5'0", you could see that these were 2 individuals that actually were not going to pose much of a threat to him in any case. So this business about wishing that it had been men is nonsense.
If it hadn't been Nicola and Fiona, it'd have been somebody else. Nicola wasn't normally crewed with Fiona, so that was purely random. And it was just bad luck. Wrong place, wrong time.
The loss of both women brought the country to a standstill.
Another reminder of the incredible risks and the great work our police service does, and my thoughts, and I think the thoughts of the whole country, will be with their families at this impossibly difficult time.
Do you expect your children to plan your funeral? You don't expect to plan your own children's funeral. So it was really strange.
2 weeks on from the murders, mourners line the streets of Manchester to pay their respects to Fiona Bone and Nicola Hughes.
I mean, it was a horrendous occasion for me, but the support we had leading up to it and then on the day, it made you soaked it up, you soaked the energy up from people. Even though it was a sad occasion, obviously.
It felt like the country stopped. Certainly Manchester came to a stop. And I can't tell you what it meant for our officers, just the, number one, the enormous support from our colleagues.
We were taken to Manchester Cathedral a few days earlier just to see what the cathedral looked like and meet the principal people conducting the service. And we thought, how are you going to fill this place? It's vast. And that came as quite a shock. The sheer number of people when you got outside the cathedral and all those people standing, bowing their heads, was amazingly humbling.
I remember on the day of the funerals, it was just desperately sad. I'd never seen Manchester come to such a standstill, and I think it was at that moment that it became clear that this had affected two families, in that their lives would never be the same again, but also the wider police family.
As Fiona and Nicola were laid to rest, their colleagues struggled to cope with the tragedy.
I felt so responsible for their deaths, and still do. You try to reassure the public that you can keep them safe and look after them, and yet I was unable to do that for my own.
The divisional commander tried to resign, but was eventually persuaded to stay in his position. In 4 months, 4 innocent people had been murdered on the streets of Manchester. Those believed to be responsible, Dale Cregan and a number of his associates, had yet to be punished for their crimes.
Cregan gave himself up. He didn't want to be killed. And then there was an enormous investigation. And people may think, well, that's easy. You know, it's obviously him that did it. But you then obviously have to prove the whole sequence. We had to try and find out where he had been, who had sheltered him, who had supported him, all the other criminal associates that had been involved in the case. So there was an enormous investigation.
The level of security surrounding Dale Cregan's trial was unprecedented. He pleaded not guilty to any of the murders.
There were armed officers routinely deployed. There were armed officers on the roofs of nearby buildings and around the court, and it was clear that police were under no illusions just as to how dangerous this man was. 2 weeks into the trial, Dale Cregan decided to change his plea to guilty for the murder of the 2 police officers. Dale Cregan said that he murdered the 2 police officers because his family had been hounded over the months that he was being sought for the murders of Mark and David Short, and that this was his way of exacting revenge.
As the trial continued, he also changed his plea to guilty for the murders of Mark and David Short. And after 19 intense weeks, the jury found him guilty of all 4 murders.
Well, at the end of the trial, Dale Cregan was handed a whole life tariff. Now, that's not something we see frequently.
Cregan was given the most severe prison sentence available in the UK, and the other suspects, Luke Livesey and Damien Gorman, received life in prison for murdering Mark Short and the attempted murder of 3 of his friends. Jermaine Ward and Anthony Wilkinson were found guilty and given life sentences for their part in the murder of David Short.
If you take someone's life, then you deserve, you know, for the rest of your life, you're incarcerated, you're locked up. And that's what I think if I focused on that person, it eats away. It's like taking poison up in yourself and up in there dying. They don't.
Cregan has shown no remorse for his crimes since the murders. But despite the trauma suffered by the families, lasting legacies were formed in Fiona and Nicola's names.
You've got two choices in there. You can either give up, you can either go and hide yourself away, or you can carry on. You can pull yourself, and I know what Nicola said. She said, pull yourself together, carry on, get up and do something. I needed something as a challenge for myself, and there was 3 charities that helped us in the early stages, and I wanted to give them something back. So I thought I'd run a marathon for that.
In March 2014, Bryn established the Nicola Hughes Memorial Fund to give support and skills to young people who have suffered a tragic loss.
So we thought, well, yeah, we'll do things to help them practical-wise. We'll pay for driving lessons for them, we'll pay for school shoes, because let's face it, if Dad's murdered, family incomes, it could be gone, it could be wiped out.
And a lasting tribute was also paid to Fiona. A building was named in her honour.
When we found out, we said, yes, that's a wonderful thing, and they invited us across to lay the foundation stone. Fiona would have enjoyed Fiona Gardens. She did Duke of Edinburgh's Gold Award as a care assistant in a care home on the Isle of Man. I think you've just got to remember the good times. You can't dwell on the bad. You can't do anything about the person who's died. In the evening, we'd possibly ring each other, and I really miss those phones. It was incredibly hard not to do it. And I was finding myself in tears going along bits of road for no apparent reasons, you know. I really do miss Fiona. And nobody to play with anymore, and nobody to take me out drinking when they shouldn't, things like that.
I still remember us laughing her head off and you know, being friendly and practical jokes and jumping on me when she sees me and everything else. So that's how I remember Nicola.